I took $1.2 million away from my children and gave it all to complete strangers. People called me cruel, but they didn't know the truth. My sons had decided that a $50,000 party was more valuable than their own mother's final moments. My name is Florence. I'm 66 years old, and this story begins with the moment my life ended, and then, against all odds, began again. The first thing I remember is the ceiling. A stark, unforgiving white acoustic tiles with tiny, meaningless perforations stretching into an infinite grid. The second is the sound of frantic, erratic beeping that I vaguely understood was the soundtrack to my own survival. It was the rhythm of a heart that had given up, been shocked back into service, and was now protesting its forced encore. I was in the ICU at the Cleveland Clinic, a ghost tethered to the living world by a spider web of tubes and wires. But the sound that truly haunts me from that night wasn't the monitor. It was the sound of a party I couldn't hear, a party my children chose over my last rites. Dr. Miller, a man with exhaustion etched so deeply around his eyes they looked like bruises, told me about the phone call later. He recounted it in a low, careful voice, as if he were delivering a second, more painful diagnosis. He'd called my eldest son, Julian, as soon as they had stabilized me after the third cardiac arrest in the ambulance. 3 times my heart had stopped. 3 times, strangers had pounded on my chest and forced air into my lungs to drag me back. "Mr. Hayes," Dr. Miller had said, his voice urgent over the phone, "this is Dr. Miller from the Cleveland Clinic. Your mother, Florence, has had a massive heart attack. We've resuscitated her 3 times. You need to come now. The next few hours are critical. This could be her last night." There was a pause, and in that pause, Dr. Miller said he could hear the distinct sound of clinking glasses, a swell of laughter, and the smooth melody of a live jazz band. A party. A party? I whispered from my hospital bed when he told me, the word tasting like rust and anesthetic. "Yes," he confirmed, unable to meet my eyes. Julian's voice, when it finally came through the line, was strained, not with worry, but with annoyance. "Doctor, we can't possibly come now. My wife and I are hosting our 15-year vow renewal. There are over 100 guests here, important people. We can't just leave." "Your mother is dying," Dr. Miller repeated, his professionalism barely concealing his disbelief. "She is literally fighting for her life." "I understand," Julian replied, though it was clear he didn't. "But my mother, she's strong. She always bounces back. She'll be fine. We'll stop by in the morning, after everything is done." Then he hung up. While I was lying on a gurney, my chest feeling like it had been kicked in by a horse, my son was worried about abandoning his canapés and champagne toast. He was worried about disappointing his wife, Vanessa, and her society friends. He was worried about the optics of leaving his own party. And his mother, the woman who had spent 40 years of her life making sure he never had to worry about a single thing, could wait. My life could wait. As I lay there, piecing together this betrayal, the sterile scent of the ICU filled my lungs. I imagined them across town, Julian in his tailored suit, Vanessa in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to. I could almost see them raising their glasses, smiling for photos, accepting congratulations on 15 years of a life I had helped build, brick by painful brick. And with every beat of my damaged heart, something inside me began to harden. It was a cold, quiet rage that settled deep in my bones, a resolve that felt heavier and more permanent than the lead apron they'd used for the X-rays. They thought I would bounce back. They were right. But they had no idea how far I was going to bounce, or that I was never, ever coming back. If you have ever felt your voice get swallowed by the noise of other people's priorities, if you know what it's like to be the emergency contact but never the main event, just do me a favor and type the name of the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story of being unseen can travel. The anger I felt was a fire, but a fire can't burn forever without fuel. As the hours crawled by in that empty, sterile room, the flame subsided, leaving behind the cold gray ash of profound loneliness. It was 3 a.m. The city of Cleveland was a tapestry of distant, indifferent lights outside my window. The only company I had was the rhythmic sigh of the ventilator and the incessant, judgmental beep of the heart monitor. It felt like a countdown, but to what? The end? Or the beginning of a reckoning? In the profound silence of that room, my life began to unspool before me, not in a flash, but in a slow, torturous rewind. The emptiness of the space around me was a cruel mirror, reflecting a life that had been anything but empty. It had been filled to the brim, overflowing with the needs, dreams, and ambitions of two other people, my sons. My husband, Robert, had been the heart of our world, a steelworker with hands calloused from labor but a touch as gentle as cashmere. He smelled of graphite and Old Spice and believed in three things with an almost religious fervor: the Cleveland Browns, a perfectly grilled steak, and the future of his boys. He died when he was just 42, a scaffolding collapse at the mill stealing him from us in a single, brutal moment. Julian was 16, trying to puff out his chest and be the man of the house, and Anthony was just 13, all sharp angles and quiet fear. Robert left behind a life insurance policy. It was a modest sum, $100,000, but to me, a 38-year-old widow with two grieving sons, it felt like both a lifeline and a sacred trust. I remember sitting at our small kitchen table, the check lying there like a holy relic, and making a silent vow to Robert's memory. This money wasn't for me. It wasn't for a new start or a smaller, easier life. It was for them. It would be the foundation upon which they would build the lives Robert would never get to see. I would be the architect, the laborer, and the silent partner in their future success. Florence, the woman with dreams of opening a small bakery, the woman who loved to dance, quietly packed herself away. In her place stood Mom, a fortress of sacrifice. That vow became my entire identity. My life became a series of calculated subtractions from my own needs to add to their column. My worn-out winter coat would last another season so Anthony could have the best baseball glove. I stopped going out with my friends, like my dear Rose, so I could afford the tutors Julian needed for his SATs. Every dollar of that insurance money, every penny I earned from my job as a legal secretary, was funneled into their futures. Private school, so they could get into good colleges. A reliable used car for Julian when he turned 17. Guitar lessons for Anthony because he showed a flicker of musical interest. I was investing, you see. I was pouring all my resources into what I believed were the two surest things in my world. I never once thought to question the return on that investment. Why would you? It's a mother's love. It's supposed to be the one investment that's guaranteed. But lying there, tethered to a machine that was doing the job my own heart was too broken to perform, I finally saw the truth. My portfolio was worthless. My sons were bankrupt. Not in money, of course. Julian was a successful marketing executive, and Anthony, despite his failures, lived a comfortable life. They were spiritually, emotionally bankrupt, and I was the one left to pay the price. The irony was so bitter it made my throat ache. I had given them the world, and in return, they couldn't even be bothered to cross town to watch me leave it. Let me ask you something, because I feel like we all play a role in our families. Were you the one always cleaning up the messes? The one everyone called in a crisis? Or were you the one who was always protected, the one the sacrifices were for? Type fixer in the comments if you were the rock. Or type dreamer if you were the one they built the dreams for. I just want to see the balance in the room tonight. That vow I made, to be the fortress for my sons, was tested in small ways for years. $100 here for a textbook, $1,000 there for a security deposit on an apartment. But the first time I was asked to tear a stone from the fortress's very foundation was 10 years ago. It was for Julian. Julian had always been the golden one, the one for whom success seemed not just possible, but preordained. He graduated with honors, landed a great job in marketing downtown, and married Vanessa, a woman who looked like she was sculpted from marble and ambition. They were the perfect power couple, and they wanted the perfect house to match. My house, the one Robert and I had bought when Julian was just a toddler, was no longer good enough. It was a simple 2-story colonial in Lakewood, with a porch swing Robert had hung himself and a stubborn oak tree in the backyard that refused to grow straight. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a home. The floorboards in the hall creaked a specific song that I knew by heart. There were pencil marks on the kitchen door frame, charting the growth of my boys from toddlers to young men who towered over me. Robert's scent, a faint mix of sawdust and pipe tobacco, still clung to the walls of his den, a ghost I refused to exorcise. That house was my sanctuary, my time capsule. It was the last piece of Robert I had left to touch. They invited me to brunch one Sunday to break the news. Not to ask, but to inform. Vanessa, stirring her mimosa with a perfectly manicured finger, did most of the talking. "Florence, we found the most incredible place in Solon," she'd said, her voice bright and brittle. "It's a new build, 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and the school district is simply the best in the state. It's an investment in our future, children's future." Julian chimed in, placing his hand over mine. It was the same gesture he used as a boy when he wanted something. "Mom, it's our dream house, but the market is so competitive. The down payment is substantial. We're a little short." I knew what was coming. I could feel the foundation stones starting to loosen. "Your house, Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "It's appreciated so much. If you sold it, we could use the equity for the down payment. It would be a family investment. You'd be investing in your grandchildren's legacy." Vanessa smiled, a tight, polished thing. "And we'd find you a lovely modern apartment, something manageable, less upkeep. You wouldn't have to worry about the lawn or the gutters ever again." They painted it as a favor to me. They were liberating me from the burden of my memories, from the responsibility of a home I loved. They saw a depreciating asset with a leaky roof. I saw the heart of my entire life. I saw the spot on the rug where Anthony took his first steps. I saw the window I'd looked out of for hours, waiting for Julian to come home from his first date. But then I thought of my vow to Robert, to give them the best. Was this not the best? A beautiful home, a safe neighborhood, an elite education for children who weren't even born yet. To say no felt like I was betraying him, betraying the very purpose I'd assigned myself for the last 2 decades. So, with a heart that felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, I agreed. The process was a blur of quiet torture. The for sale sign on the lawn felt like a tombstone. Packing 30 years of life into cardboard boxes felt like packing away parts of myself. The day I handed the keys to a young, smiling family, I had to physically restrain myself from telling them they were standing on holy ground. The house sold for $150,000. I signed the check over to Julian in the sterile office of the title company. He hugged me, his embrace quick and businesslike. "This is just a loan, Mom," he whispered, his promise echoing in the empty room. "Once I get my next promotion, I'll pay you back every penny, with interest." I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with beige walls and no soul, convincing myself it was worth it. I was a good mother. I had done the right thing. I had secured my son's dream. It never occurred to me then that I had just sold my past to finance a future I would have no real place in. If selling my home was like tearing a stone from the foundation of my fortress, the next request was like being asked to hand over the keys to the armory. It came not from Julian the pragmatist, but from Anthony the dreamer. And in many ways it was a much harder request to refuse. Unlike his older brother, Anthony never chased the conventional American dream of a suburban house and a corporate ladder. He chased lightning in a bottle. He was the artist, the musician, the entrepreneur, always alight with a new, brilliant idea that was destined to change the world. His passion was infectious, but his follow-through was inconsistent. His wife, Jessica, was different from Vanessa. Where Vanessa was sharp and cold, Jessica was soft and warm, a master of gentle, persuasive encouragement that always seemed to end with my checkbook open. They came to my small, beige apartment 5 years ago. I remember the scent of the rain on their coats as they sat on my second-hand sofa, a nervous energy crackling between them. Anthony, his eyes shining with that familiar, fervent light, pulled out his laptop. He had a slideshow. It was for his new tech startup, an app called ConnectSphere, which he breathlessly described as a tool that would revolutionize community organizing. It was full of buzzwords I didn't understand: synergy, user engagement, market disruption, but the message was clear. This was the one, the big one. "I've poured everything into this, Mom," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and desperation. "We've got the prototype, we've got a small team. All we need is the seed money to get us through the next 6 months. We're so close to getting a huge investment from a venture capital firm, but we need to show them we're viable." Jessica placed a comforting hand on his knee, then turned her wide, earnest eyes to me. "Florence, he works so hard. He's up until 3 a.m. every night coding. I've never seen him believe in anything like this. This isn't just a project, it's his calling. Then came the ask. It wasn't for equity from a house I no longer owned. It was for the money I had left. My retirement savings. The $75,000 I had painstakingly scraped together over 30 years of working as a legal secretary, every dollar a testament to a skipped vacation, a delayed car repair, an off-brand purchase. That money wasn't a luxury. It was my dignity. It was the promise I had made to myself that in my final years, I would not be a burden. It was the security of knowing I could afford a better nursing home, that I could handle a medical emergency without having to beg my successful children for help. It was my independence, liquidated into a number on a bank statement. Anthony, that's everything I have, I whispered, the words feeling thin and useless. I know, Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he came to kneel in front of my armchair. And I wouldn't ask if it wasn't a sure thing. This isn't a gamble, it's a bridge. A bridge to a future where I can pay you back tenfold. I'll make you a primary shareholder. You'll have a condo in Florida. I swear it. Jessica added softly. We've exhausted every other option, Florence. Banks, loans. You're our last hope. My last hope? How could a mother say no to that? How could I look at my son, the boy whose fevers I'd cooled and whose nightmares I'd chased away, and tell him my financial security was more important than his dream? My rational mind screamed that it was a terrible idea, but the heart of a mother doesn't operate on logic. It operates on a desperate, often foolish brand of hope. The next day, I went to the bank and wired the money. $75,000. My future. Gone in a single transaction. The first few months were filled with enthusiastic updates. Then the calls became less frequent. The enthusiasm waned. 6 months later, he called me, his voice flat. The VC funding fell through, Mom. We had to fold. The money's gone. There was no talk of paying me back. There was no deep, heartfelt apology. Just a resigned sigh and a phrase that stabbed me in the heart. That's just the startup world. High risk, high reward. At least I tried. He tried, with my life savings, and I was left with nothing but the empty echo of his broken promises. Have you ever been the unofficial, unpaid investor in someone else's dream? Your time, your energy, your money poured into a vision that wasn't your own? If you've ever been that person, just type the word giver in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone. You might think that losing my home and my life savings would be the deepest cuts, and they were in a way. They were clean, surgical wounds that left visible scars. But there is another kind of pain, a death by 1,000 paper cuts, that is far more insidious. This was the pain administered daily, with practiced, smiling precision, by my 2 daughters-in-law. Vanessa and Jessica were 2 sides of the same cruel coin. Vanessa, Julian's wife, wielded her cruelty like a stiletto, sharp, direct, and meant to draw blood. Jessica, on the other hand, favored a slow-acting poison, delivered with a spoonful of sugar and a look of deep concern. Vanessa was a creature of aesthetics and social standing. In her world, I was a relic, a folksy antique that clashed with her minimalist modern decor. She never saw me, Florence, the woman who raised her husband. She saw Julian's mother, a slightly embarrassing social obligation to be managed. I remember one Christmas at their sprawling Solon home. I had spent a week knitting a beautiful deep green sweater for her. I was proud of it. When she unwrapped it, she held it up between 2 fingers as if it were a dish rag. "Oh, Florence," she'd cooed for the benefit of her guests. "How rustic. You are just so wonderfully traditional." Later that evening, she pulled me aside. "As a late birthday gift," she'd whispered, pressing a business card into my hand. "I've booked you a consultation with my personal shopper. We need to find you a style that's a bit more appropriate for your age." Food was her favorite weapon. My lasagna, a recipe passed down from my Italian grandmother that my boys used to devour, was deemed terribly heavy. My Sunday roasts were a heart attack on a plate. The final straw was the apple pie. It was Robert's favorite, a recipe I had perfected over 40 years. I brought it to their house for a 4th of July barbecue. Vanessa smiled brightly, thanked me, and placed it on the counter. An hour later, I went into the kitchen for a glass of water, and saw her, her back to me, quietly scraping the entire pie into the garbage disposal. She thought I couldn't hear her muttering to her friend, "Can you imagine the carbs? Besides, who knows if her kitchen is even clean?" Jessica's methods were softer, and therefore more damaging. She cloaked her criticism in the guise of love and concern. She would watch me with her head tilted, a worried little frown on her face. "Oh, Florence, you look so tired," she'd say, even on days I felt perfectly fine. "Are you sure you should be living all by yourself in that apartment? Anthony and I worry so much." It wasn't a question, it was a seed of doubt she was planting, positioning me as frail and incompetent. She systematically erased my role as a grandmother. Invitations to my grandson's soccer games or school concerts would arrive a day late. "Oh my goodness, I am the worst," she'd text me. "I could have sworn I sent that on Monday. The boys were asking for you." She made it seem like a mistake, an unfortunate oversight, but the message was clear: my presence was not required. She co-opted my traditions, then presented them back to me as her own improved versions. She would ask for my Christmas cookie recipe, only for me to see photos on social media of her new, organic, gluten-free cookies, with a caption about creating healthier family traditions. And my sons? My sons were silent, willing accomplices. Julian, ever the peacemaker, would refuse to challenge Vanessa. "That's just how she is, Mom," he'd say with a shrug, as if her cruelty were an unchangeable law of nature. Anthony, ensnared by Jessica's gentle manipulations, would take her side. "Mom, you're being too sensitive. She's just trying to help. She cares about you." They didn't see it. Or perhaps they didn't want to. They didn't see that for a decade, these two women had been waging a quiet war against me, a campaign to diminish my role, erase my traditions, and politely, smilingly, push me to the absolute margins of the family I had built. The phone call from the hospital, the choice to stay at the party, it wasn't a sudden, shocking betrayal. It was just the final paper cut, the one that finally severed the last thread of hope I had been clinging to. All those years of quiet dismissals, of being corrected and erased, were leading to one singular, spectacular moment of invalidation. It wasn't just a party they chose over my life, it was this party. A monument to a life I had funded but was not invited to inhabit. The cruelest part, the detail that felt like a deliberate twist of the knife, was the timing. Their lavish vow renewal was scheduled for a Wednesday. My 66th birthday had been the Sunday before. 3 days prior, my birthday celebration consisted of a 2-minute phone call from Julian while he was clearly in his car, the sound of the turn signal blinking impatiently in the background. "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you have a great day. Talk soon." Anthony sent a text message with a balloon emoji. That was it. No visit, no card, no cake. I spent the day in my beige apartment, looking at old photo albums of the birthdays I used to throw for them, themed parties with homemade cakes, dozens of their little friends running through the yard of the house in Lakewood, mountains of presents I'd saved for months to buy. I learned about the details of the vow renewal by accident. My grandson, Julian's boy, let it slip during a brief video call. "Grandma, we can't talk long. Mom's stressing about the ice sculpture for the party on Wednesday." "The party?" I had asked, my voice feigning casual interest. "Yeah, for their 15 years of perfection thing," he'd said, rolling his eyes in that way only a 12-year-old can. "It's at the country club. Mom says it has to be flawless." After the call, a morbid curiosity took hold. I went on social media, something I rarely do, and found the event page Vanessa had created. It was public. It was a spectacle. The venue was the Chilton Hills Country Club, a place I had only ever seen from the outside, with rolling green lawns and stone gates. The invitation was a work of art, embossed in silver. The theme, as my grandson had said, was 15 years of perfection. There was a link to a registry, not for gifts but for donations to a honeymoon fund for a second trip to Italy. As I scrolled, the details became more and more obscene. A string quartet for the cocktail hour, a 5-course plated dinner, a custom-built floral arch for them to stand under as they renewed the vows I hadn't been invited to witness the first time around. And then I saw a post from a friend of Vanessa's, gushing about the planning. "Only you would spend $50,000 to make a party this perfect. Can't wait to celebrate you too. $50,000. The number echoed in the silence of my apartment. It ricocheted off the cheap beige walls and slammed into my chest. $50,000. That was a third of what I got for selling my entire past, for selling Robert's house. It was 2/3 of my entire life savings that I had given to Anthony. For them, it was the price of a perfect evening. For me, it was the sum of my life's sacrifices. They were spending a fortune to celebrate a marriage that I had helped make possible, in a home that I had bought, for a life that was now utterly foreign to me. That was when the physical pain started. A dull ache in the center of my chest, a pressure that felt like one of my old photo albums was sitting on my ribs. I dismissed it as heartburn, as the grief and stress finally manifesting physically. But it was more than that. It was the weight of a terrible final understanding. I wasn't just an afterthought, I was the ghost at their feast. The value of my entire existence, my love, my home, my security, my past, my future had been calculated, and it was worth less than a block of frozen water carved into their initials. Lying in the hospital, the truth was no longer a dull ache. It was a clean, sharp certainty. They weren't just at a party. They were at my funeral, and they were the ones who had sent the invitations. For a long time, maybe hours, I just let that final, devastating truth wash over me. I had been replaced. My children were celebrating their perfect lives on the ashes of mine. The initial wave was pure, bottomless grief. It was a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight, heavier than any lead blanket, pressing down on my already shattered chest. I thought about Robert. I thought about the promises I'd made. I thought about the little boys who had clung to my legs, and the woman who had given every last piece of herself to them, until there was nothing left but this empty, beeping shell in a hospital bed. For a moment, I wanted to let go. I wanted to close my eyes and just let the monitor flatline, to give them what they so clearly, subconsciously, desired. A quiet, convenient end. But then, something else happened. Deep beneath the ocean of sorrow, a current began to shift. It started as a flicker, a tiny spark of indignation in the vast darkness. They were at my funeral? Fine. But the deceased was not going to go quietly. The ghost was about to start haunting. The grief didn't vanish, but it was suddenly consumed by a fire far more powerful, rage, not the hot, screaming rage of a tantrum. This was different. It was a cold, silent, and terrifyingly clear fury. It was the kind of anger that crystallizes your thoughts and focuses your will into a single, sharp point. For the first time in 40 years, the fog of unconditional motherly love lifted, and I saw the landscape of my life with perfect, brutal clarity. I saw the decades of one-sided sacrifice, the mountain of broken promises, the pattern of casual disregard. I saw my sons not as the little boys I had raised, but as the men they had become. Julian, the polished coward, and Anthony, the charming leech. Lying in that bed, I felt a part of me that had been dormant for decades begin to stir. It was Florence, not Mom, not Grandma, not Julian and Anthony's long-suffering mother. It was Florence, the woman who had been packed away with her dreams of a bakery and her love of dancing, and she was furious. She had been asleep for a long time, and she woke up to find her house had been robbed, her savings account emptied, and her very name almost forgotten. The beeping of the heart monitor no longer sounded like a countdown to death. It sounded like a war drum. My purpose, which for so long had been to absorb their pain and facilitate their dreams, was now reforged in that fire. My new purpose was to teach them a lesson they would never forget, a lesson in value. They had assigned me a value of 0. I was about to show them the true cost of their miscalculation. I wasn't going to scream or cry or write them a guilt-ridden letter. That was the old Florence. The new Florence was a strategist. The new Florence understood that the only language her sons and their wives truly understood was the language of consequences. They had built their perfect lives on the foundation of my sacrifices. I was about to become a human earthquake and bring the whole glittering facade crashing down around them. The plan began to form in my mind, piece by devastating piece. It would not be swift. It would be meticulous. It would be final. They wanted me to bounce back? Oh, I would. I would bounce back so high they would never be able to reach me again. There is a moment in your life when you stop asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" and you start asking, "What am I going to do about it?" If you have ever felt that switch flip inside you, that moment you decided you were done being a doormat and started being the door, I want you to just type the word "awake" in the comments. Let me feel that power with you. Clarity is a powerful drug. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, my mind was sharp, focused, and unburdened by the soft, blurry edges of maternal obligation. Lying there, I took a mental inventory of my life, not of the emotional sacrifices, but of the tangible assets. My small apartment was a rental, my car was a decade old, my savings were gone. It would seem to the outside world that I had nothing left. But that's where they were wrong. My husband Robert had been a steel worker, but he was also the son of a man who had survived the Great Depression. He was frugal, cautious, and surprisingly savvy. He never trusted banks completely. Every month for 20 years, he took a small portion of his paycheck and invested it in solid, blue-chip stocks companies that made things, companies that powered the country. After he died, I never touched that portfolio. It was Robert's legacy, a quiet testament to his hard work, and I let it sit, growing silently in the background of our lives for decades. It was the inheritance I intended to pass down to his sons, a final gift from the father they barely remembered. My sons, of course, knew about it. They saw it as their birthright, their inevitable golden parachute. In my current will, written years ago, that portfolio, now worth a staggering $1.2 million, was to be split evenly between them. That was my weapon. The nurse on duty, a kind woman named Maria, had been checking on me every hour. My vitals had stabilized, a fact she attributed to rest. I knew it was due to purpose. "Maria," I whispered, my voice raspy, "could you please hand me my phone and the charger from my purse?" She hesitated, a flicker of concern on her face. "Florence, you should be resting," Dr. Miller said. "Please," I said, and there must have been a new kind of steel in my voice, because she nodded and retrieved it for me. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from adrenaline, as I plugged it in. The screen flickered to life. Using the hospital's public Wi-Fi, I opened a web browser. My search was simple: Best Estate Planning Attorneys, Cleveland, Ohio. I scrolled past the flashy ads and looked for a name that sounded serious, formidable. I found it in a woman named Evelyn Albright of the Sterling Law Group. Her biography said she specialized in complex family trusts and contested wills. Perfect. I dialed the number, my heart thumping a steady, powerful rhythm. A paralegal answered, and I used a tone I hadn't used since my days as a legal secretary, a tone of polite, non-negotiable authority. "I need to speak with Miss Albright directly. My name is Florence Hayes. It is a matter of extreme urgency regarding an estate of over $1 million. Minutes later, a crisp, intelligent voice was on the line. "This is Evelyn Albright. How can I help you, Mrs. Hayes?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Miss Albright, I am currently a patient in the ICU at the Cleveland Clinic. I have suffered a major cardiac event, but I assure you, I am of perfectly sound mind. I need to make an immediate and complete revision of my last will and testament. I wish to disinherit my 2 sons, Julian and Anthony Hayes, entirely." There was a moment of professional silence on the other end. "I see," she said, her voice even. "Mrs. Hayes, that is a very significant decision. May I ask what you intend to do with the estate instead?" It was the test question, the one to gauge my rationality. I had already decided. My late husband, Robert Hayes, was a steelworker. He believed in the dignity of hard work. I want to create a perpetual trust in his name, the Robert Hayes Memorial Scholarship Fund. It will provide full college scholarships to the children of unionized blue-collar workers in the state of Ohio. My sons believe they are entitled to his legacy. I'm going to ensure it goes to children who might actually appreciate it." Another pause, this one shorter. I could almost hear the gears turning in her legal mind. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, and I could detect a note of respect in her voice. "That is a powerful legacy. To make this as ironclad as possible, I will need to come to you. I will bring 2 witnesses and a notary. We will need to document that you are making this decision freely and without coercion. The hospital can provide a physician to attest to your lucidity. We can make this happen within 24 hours. "Thank you, Miss Albright," I said. "Let's make it happen." After I hung up, I leaned back against the hard hospital pillows. A wave of profound calm washed over me. For 40 years, my life had been defined by what I had given away. Today, for the first time, I was defined by what I was taking back. The fortress was no longer under siege. The queen was back on the throne, and she was rewriting the laws of the kingdom. The day after my call with Miss Albright, she arrived at the hospital as promised. She was a force of nature in a charcoal gray suit, flanked by 2 serious-looking associates who served as witnesses. A hospital administrator and Dr. Miller himself were also present, the latter to sign an affidavit attesting to my mental clarity. I signed the documents in my hospital bed, the cheap pen feeling as mighty as a scepter. With each stroke, I felt a lifetime of resentment and silent suffering being transmuted into decisive, legal action. The Robert Hayes Memorial Scholarship Fund was no longer an idea, it was an inevitability. When Miss Albright left, she took my old life with her in her leather briefcase. I was left feeling lighter than I had in decades. This newfound peace was the armor I wore when my children finally graced me with their presence. It was Friday afternoon, a full 2 days after their vow renewal. They bustled in not with the panicked relief of children who had almost lost a parent, but with the weary air of people running an inconvenient errand. Julian was holding a bouquet of carnations from the hospital gift shop, the cellophane crinkling with every movement. Vanessa was already scrolling through emails on her phone. Anthony was carrying a box of chocolates, which he knew I couldn't eat, and Jessica was fussing over him, brushing imaginary lint from his shoulder. "Mom," Julian began, leaning in to give me a kiss on the forehead that never quite landed. "You look much better. See? We told you you'd bounce back." Vanessa didn't even look up from her screen. "Honestly, Florence, the stress you put us under. I had to cancel a brunch with a new client this morning to be here. She had made my cardiac arrest an inconvenience that had cost her a business meeting." Anthony, ever the thoughtless one, jumped in. "The party was a huge success, Mom. You would have been so proud. I met a guy who might be interested in my new business plan. It was incredible networking." They spoke of the party, their party, as I lay there with a 6-inch incision healing in my chest. They talked about the food, the music, the important people they had impressed. It was as if they were recapping a successful business merger. I just listened, my face a placid mask. My silence, which in the past they would have mistaken for passive agreement, now seemed to unnerve them. They exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the weepy, guilt-tripping mother they had expected. Finally, Julian cleared his throat, getting to the real purpose of their visit. "Mom, we've been talking, all of us, and after this scare, we think it's time to make a change." Jessica stepped forward, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. "Florence, we love you so much, and that's why it's so hard to see you in this big, lonely apartment. It's not safe. We've been researching some wonderful senior living communities. A nursing home. The final chapter they had written for me." Vanessa, now off her phone, pulled up a website on her tablet. "Look at this one in Westlake. It's called Maple Creek Meadows. They have water aerobics, a library, and organized trips. You'd be around people your own age. You could finally make some friends." The implication was clear. I, the woman who had a rich inner life and a dear friend in Rose, was friendless and pitiable. Julian laid out the logistics. "The best part is the on-site medical staff, 24/7. If something like this ever happens again, we won't have to worry." He didn't say, "You won't have to worry." He said, "we." It was about alleviating their burden, not ensuring my care. "It costs about $4,000 a month," he continued, breezing past the number. "But with your pension and a small contribution from each of us, it's completely manageable." They had it all figured out. My life, neatly packaged and filed away in a facility for a manageable monthly fee. They were talking about me as if I wasn't there, a logistical problem to be solved, a piece of aging furniture to be moved into storage. Have you ever sat in a room while the people who are supposed to love you most plan your life right in front of you, talking over you as if you're a ghost? If you know that unique soul-crushing feeling of being made irrelevant in your own story, just type "I am here" in the comments, because you are, and I see you. When their pitch was finally over, they all looked at me, expecting tears or arguments. I simply gave them a small, serene smile. "Thank you for being so thoughtful," I said, my voice even and calm. "You've really laid it all out. You've made my path forward perfectly clear." They beamed, visibly relieved. They thought they had won. They thought I had accepted my gentle exile. They had no idea that the path I now saw so clearly was the one leading far, far away from them. The moment the hospital room door clicked shut behind them, the scent of Vanessa's expensive perfume lingering in the air like a toxic cloud, the quiet calm I had maintained shattered, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. Their plan for me was a cage, a comfortable, well-managed cage with water aerobics, but a cage nonetheless, and they had just handed me the key. My hands were steady as I reached for my phone again. There was only one person in the world I could trust with what I was about to do. One person who had seen the cracks forming in my family's facade for years, who had tried to warn me, and who had loved me not because of what I could give, but because of who I was. My friend, Rose. Rose and I had been friends for over 40 years. We met in a prenatal yoga class when I was pregnant with Julian. She was a loud, fiercely loyal woman with a laugh that could shake a room and absolutely no tolerance for nonsense. While I was the quiet fortress, she was the roaring cannon, always ready to defend me. She was the one who, after I sold my house, took me out for a stiff drink and told me flat out, "Florence, that boy and his Barbie doll are playing you like a fiddle." I hadn't listened then. I was about to make up for lost time. She answered on the second ring, her voice a familiar, comforting bark. "Florence, I've been calling the hospital, and they've been giving me the runaround. How are you? Are those useless sons of yours finally there?" I took a deep breath. "Rose," I said, my voice low and urgent. "They just left, and I need your help. I'm planning a prison break." There was a beat of silence, and then her signature explosive laugh. "It's about damn time. I'll bake a cake with a file in it. What's the plan, Warden?" And so I told her. Everything. The doctor's call, the party, the years of being worn down by 1,000 cuts, the visit just now, and their neat little plan to ship me off to Maple Creek Meadows. And then I told her my plan. The change to the will, the scholarship fund, and the final act, the disappearance. As I spoke, I didn't hear shock in her voice. I heard vindication. I heard the quiet hum of a friend who was watching the person she loved finally stand up. "I knew it," she said when I finished, her voice a low growl. "I knew they'd push you too far one day. That Vanessa has always had dollar signs in her eyes, and Jessica is so sweet she could give you diabetes, but it's all an act. So, you're really doing it? You're leaving." "I'm already gone, Rose," I replied, and I had never felt more certain of anything in my life. "But I need a getaway driver." "You tell me what you need," she said, her voice all business. "Anything. I have a cousin, Patricia, in Sarasota, Florida. She's always told me I have a place with her. That's where I'm going. I need you to get me from here to the Greyhound bus station without anyone seeing me. The doctors are talking about discharging me next week. I want to be gone before they even sign the papers." "Done," she said without hesitation. "There's more. I have a small savings account at a local credit union, about $8,000 they don't know about. It's my Run for the Hills fund I started after Anthony's business failed. I need you to withdraw it for me, all of it, in cash." "Consider it done," she repeated. "And the apartment, Rose, the furniture, my things. I can't bear the thought of them picking through it. Miss Albright is drawing up a power of attorney for you. It will give you the right to handle everything. Sell what you can, keep what you want, and give the rest away. Just erase me from that place." "Florence," she said, and for the first time, I heard her voice soften, thick with emotion. "It would be my absolute honor to dismantle their inheritance one hideous beige armchair at a time." We spent the next hour working out the logistics, two 60-something women plotting a cross-country escape with the precision of military generals. We set the date, Sunday night, when the hospital was quietest, after my children had made their final, perfunctory weekend visit. When I hung up the phone, the loneliness that had been my constant companion in that room had vanished. I was not alone. I had an ally. I had a co-conspirator. I had family. It might not have been the family I had given birth to, But it was real, it was loyal, and it was ready to help me burn the old world down. The week leading up to my escape was the strangest of my life. On the outside, I was the model patient. I took my medication without complaint, walked the sterile hallways with a nurse for my prescribed exercise, and smiled placidly at the doctors. I told them I was feeling stronger every day. On the inside, I was a coiled spring, a general counting down the hours to a secret invasion. My son's final visit that Sunday was almost comical. They came armed with glossy brochures for Maple Creek Meadows, their faces bright with the self-satisfaction of children who had solved a difficult puzzle. They spread the pamphlets on my hospital blanket, pointing out the amenities as if they were trying to sell me a timeshare. "Look, Mom, there's a putting green," Julian had said. "And a movie night every Friday," Anthony added. I just nodded and smiled, my mind miles away, picturing the worn-out seats of a Greyhound bus. "It looks lovely, dears," I'd said. "Thank you for taking such good care of me." They left, content and secure, never once noticing the glint of steel in my eyes. That night at 9 p.m., during the chaotic lull of the nursing shift change, the operation began. Rose arrived, not as a visitor, but as my savior. She carried a single, unassuming tote bag. Inside was a simple pair of black pants, a gray sweater, comfortable walking shoes, and an old silk scarf to cover my hair. As I slowly changed out of the flimsy, demeaning hospital gown, I felt like I was shedding a skin. I was no longer Florence the patient, Florence the victim. With each button I fastened, I was becoming someone new, someone anonymous and free. Rose peeked out into the hallway. "Coast is clear," she whispered, her eyes alight with the thrill of it all. "Let's move." Walking out of that hospital was the most terrifying and exhilarating thing I have ever done. Every footstep echoed. Every distant cough from another room sounded like an alarm. I kept my head down, focusing on Rose's steady back as she led me through the labyrinthine corridors, past the nurse's station, and towards a side exit used for maintenance. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but for the first time in weeks, it was a rhythm of life, not of failure. The cold night air of Cleveland hit me like a slap, smelling of damp pavement and freedom. Rose's old Buick was parked in the shadows, the engine humming softly. We got in, and without a word she pulled out onto the street. The drive to the bus station was a silent funeral procession for the life I was leaving behind. We passed the corner diner where Robert had proposed to me. We drove by the elementary school where I had volunteered as a librarian. We crossed the bridge with the skyline glittering in the distance, a city that held every memory I had ever made. I felt no sadness. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. The Greyhound station on Chester Avenue was exactly as you'd imagine it at 10 p.m. on a Sunday. A purgatory of flickering fluorescent lights, sticky floors, and weary travelers. It was a place for people in between lives, between cities, between hope and despair. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. Rose went to the counter and bought my ticket with the cash she had withdrawn for me. One way, Cleveland to Sarasota. No name required. At the gate, she pulled me into a fierce, bone-crushing hug. She pressed a thick envelope of cash into my hand. "This is your war chest," she said, her voice rough. "Don't you call me until you're safe and settled. No trail, remember? What will you do when they find out I'm gone?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Rose pulled back and gave me a grim smile. "I'm going to sit on my porch with a tall glass of iced tea and enjoy the show." She squeezed my hand one last time. "You give 'em hell, Florence. Or better yet, you give 'em nothing at all." I watched her walk away, my fierce, loyal friend, my true family. Then I turned and walked towards the bus, my small bag over my shoulder. Each step was a step away from the woman everyone thought I was. There's a power in taking that first, terrifying step into the unknown, isn't there? It's the moment you choose your own path, no matter how uncertain. If you're with me on this journey, if you're rooting for this escape, just do me a small favor and check the time where you are right now, and type it in the comments. Let this moment be a timestamp for the beginning of a new life. I found my window seat, and as the bus hissed and groaned its way out of the station and onto the dark, open highway, I took out my phone for one final, parting shot. As the bus merged onto the dark expanse of I-71 South, Leaving the lights of Cleveland to shrink into a distant memory, I took my phone out one last time. My fingers felt steady, my mind clear. I opened a group message to my sons and their wives. The cursor blinked, waiting for a final plea, a tearful goodbye, a message of maternal love. That's the message they would have expected. It's not the one they received. I typed 10 words. I am gone. A representative will be in touch. Goodbye. I hit send. Then, without a moment's hesitation, I powered the phone down, removed the SIM card, and snapped the small piece of plastic in two. I let the pieces fall into the empty coffee cup beside me. It was done. The final line of communication was severed. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt the sweet, quiet relief of being completely and utterly unreachable. Of course, I wasn't there for what happened a week later, but Rose, my glorious, wonderful Rose, recounted the entire scene to me over a crackling long-distance call with such delicious detail that I feel I can see it as clearly as if I'd been a fly on Vanessa's perfectly painted walls. A week had passed, a week in which my children had moved from annoyance at my silence to a low-grade panic. They had called the hospital and been told I had left against medical advice. They had called my apartment and gotten no answer. Rose told me they had even filed a missing persons report, not out of genuine concern for my safety, she suspected, but out of a growing fear of social embarrassment. On a bright Saturday afternoon, as the four of them were gathered in Julian and Vanessa's cavernous living room, a room I had paid for but had never felt welcome, and the doorbell rang. Vanessa answered it, a polite socialite smile plastered on her face, which promptly dissolved when she saw Rose standing on her doorstep. Rose wasn't dressed for a social call. She wore a stern expression and carried a large, ominous-looking manila envelope. "Rose," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This isn't a good time." "I'm not here for coffee, Vanessa," Rose replied, her voice cutting through the air like a serrated knife. "I am here as a legal representative for Florence Hayes. I have a delivery for all of you." She pushed past Vanessa into the foyer, where Julian, Anthony, and Jessica were looking on with confusion. Rose didn't wait for an invitation. She walked to the center of the room, placed the envelope on their marble coffee table, and looked each of them in the eye. "This is from Florence." Julian was the one who opened it, his hands trembling slightly. Rose said the room was dead silent as he pulled out the documents, his face going from confusion to disbelief to a sickly pale shade of horror. First, he read my letter aloud, his voice cracking. It was just 3 sentences. "You chose a party over my life. I have chosen my own life over you. These documents are the consequences." Then, he unfolded the next document, the official, notarized, ironclad revision of my last will and testament. Rose watched his eyes dart across the page, saw the moment he registered the clause that explicitly named him and his brother as being disinherited. She saw the color drain from Anthony's face as Julian read the part about the entire $1.2 million estate being placed into the Robert Hayes Memorial Scholarship Fund. But I hadn't stopped there. The final document was a masterpiece from Miss Albright. It was a formal cease and desist notice. It legally forbade Julian, Vanessa, Anthony, and Jessica from attempting to contact me, my cousin Patricia, or Rose herself, through any means. It stated that any attempt to do so would be met with immediate legal action for harassment. It legally, officially, erased them from my life. Rose said the aftermath was pure chaos. Vanessa, her mask of perfection shattered, apparently let out a shriek and started yelling about how I was senile and how they would contest this. Jessica burst into manufactured tears, sobbing into Anthony's shoulder. Anthony just stood there, looking utterly lost, like a little boy whose favorite toy had just been taken away. And Julian. Julian sank onto his designer sofa, the papers slipping from his grasp, the full weight of what he had lost, not just the money, but the mother he had taken for granted his entire life, finally crashing down on him. Rose didn't stay for the show. Her job was done. She gave them one last, withering look. "You have been served," she said, turned on her heel, and walked out, leaving the 4 of them standing in the beautiful, expensive ruins of the lives they had built on my back. There's a saying, when you seek revenge, dig 2 graves. For weeks, as I settled into the quiet rhythm of my new life in Florida, I wondered if that would be true for me. I had detonated a bomb in the heart of my family. Would the fallout consume me too? But as news trickled in from Rose, who heard things through the Cleveland grapevine, I realized the saying was incomplete. Sometimes, when you seek justice, the people you target are the ones who hand each other the shovels. My revenge was never about inflicting pain. It was about holding up a mirror. I wanted them to see themselves, truly, without the flattering filter of my unconditional love and my open wallet. I never imagined how thoroughly they would shatter the reflection. Rose told me the first casualty was the alliance between the two families. The shock and grief not for me, but for the $1.2 million quickly curdled into vicious, finger-pointing rage. At Julian and Vanessa's house, the argument was about class and image. Rose heard from a neighbor that the shouting was so loud you could hear it from the street. Vanessa, stripped of her polite veneer, was apparently a harpy. $600,000, Julian, she had screamed, the figure a weapon. Our boys' Ivy League education, our summer home in the Hamptons, all gone. Gone to fund scholarships for a bunch of grimy, ungrateful factory kids. This is your fault. You were always too soft on her. We should have taken control of her finances years ago. And for the first time in his life, my golden son, the one who never made a wave, fought back. Control her finances? She was my mother, Vanessa. We left her alone in a hospital to die while we were sipping champagne and congratulating ourselves. What did you think was going to happen? Their perfect marriage, that celebrated 15 years of perfection, was revealed to be nothing more than a business partnership, and a major asset had just been liquidated. The foundation, built on my money and my silence, had cracked. At Anthony and Jessica's, the implosion was quieter but more pathetic. Theirs was a panic born of desperation. I had been their emergency plan, their perennial safety net. Now the net was gone. Jessica, the master of gentle suggestion, turned her subtle manipulations into outright accusations. You lost her savings on that stupid app, Anthony. Rose recounted Jessica's tearful tirade to her mother over the phone, which was then relayed through a chain of gossiping friends. And now this. What did you say to her? You must have said something to make her do this. How are we going to pay the mortgage next year? How are we going to afford the kids' camp? Anthony, a boy in a man's body who had never truly had to stand on his own 2 feet, had no answers. He was adrift. The two brothers, who had been united in their neglect, were now enemies, each blaming the other for the loss of their fortune. Julian accused Anthony of being a financial drain who had bled me dry for years, and Anthony accused Julian of being a snob who was too embarrassed by our humble beginnings to treat me with respect. They tried to fight it, of course. They pooled what money they had left to hire a lawyer. Their attorney sent a blustering letter to Miss Dade Albright, claiming I had been unduly influenced and was not of sound mind. Miss Albright, in turn, sent back a package containing the signed affidavit from Dr. Miller, a statement from my attending nurse, and a psychiatric evaluation I had agreed to the day before I left the hospital, all confirming my lucidity and firm resolve. They were checkmated. The fortress I had built for them was now the fortress I had built against them, and its walls were unbreachable. They had no one to blame but themselves. It's a strange and ugly thing to watch a family tear itself apart over money that was never truly theirs to begin with, isn't it? It reveals a truth that love often tries to hide. Let me know what you think is more powerful in tearing a family apart, greed or guilt. Type greed or guilt in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you believe is the stronger poison. While their world was collapsing under the weight of its own greed, mine was expanding under the gentle, forgiving warmth of the Florida Sunday. The first few weeks in Sarasota were like learning to breathe again after a lifetime spent underwater. The air itself felt different, thick with the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine and the clean tang of salt from the Gulf. Cleveland was a memory of gray skies, damp cold, and obligation. Sarasota was a symphony of vibrant color, of life that grew effortlessly and abundantly. My cousin Patricia's house was my sanctuary. It was a modest, single-story home, painted a cheerful shade of coral, with a screened-in lanai that looked out onto a riotous garden of hibiscus and bougainvillea. Patricia, a woman who had been widowed for a decade, welcomed me not as a refugee, but as a long-lost sister. She understood loss, but more importantly, she understood rebirth. She never pushed me to talk about what had happened. She simply gave me space, time, and endless glasses of iced tea. For the first time since Robert died, my days belonged to me. There were no schedules to keep, no meals to cook for ungrateful mouths, no emotional crises to manage. The silence that I had once found so deafening in my little Cleveland apartment was now filled with the chirping of birds and the rustle of palm fronds. At first, the sheer emptiness of my obligations was terrifying. My identity for 40 years had been mother. Without that title, who was I? Slowly, carefully, I began to find out. I started with the simple things. I would wake with the sun, not an alarm, and walk the 2 miles to Siesta Key Beach. I'd take off my shoes and walk along the shoreline, the fine white sand cool beneath my feet, the gentle waves washing away my footprints as quickly as I made them. I watched the sandpipers skitter along the water's edge and the pelicans dive for their breakfast. I wasn't thinking about my sons, my old life, or my broken heart. I was just there, present, breathing. After a month, Patricia encouraged me to join her at the local community arts center. I walked past the pottery studio and the dance hall and found myself drawn to a bright, airy room where a watercolor class was in session. The students were all around my age, their faces a mixture of concentration and quiet joy. The next day, I signed up. I was terrible at first. My trees looked like green blobs, my sunsets like muddy puddles, but it didn't matter. The feeling of the brush in my hand, the magic of watching pure color spread across wet paper, was a kind of therapy I never knew I needed. I wasn't creating masterpieces, I was creating peace. I made friends, women named Eleanor and Susan and Maria, who asked me about my favorite books, not about my children. They invited me to their book club, to the farmer's market, to an outdoor concert in the park. My world, which had shrunk to the size of a beige apartment and a hospital room, was now blooming with new people, new experiences, new colors. One afternoon, about 3 months after I had arrived, I was sitting on the lanai, painting the hibiscus in the garden. The sun was warm on my skin, and a gentle breeze was blowing. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass of the sliding door. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her face was relaxed, her skin had a healthy glow, and her eyes were clear. The haunted, weary look was gone. She was smiling. In that moment, I felt a pang, not of sadness, but of a strange, distant pity for the 2 men in Cleveland who called themselves my sons. They thought they had everything. They had the big houses, the important jobs, the perfect-looking families, but they would never know this. They would never know the profound, quiet joy of sitting in the sun, of creating something beautiful for no one but yourself, of being completely and utterly free. They had lost their inheritance, but I had found my life. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that I had gotten the better end of the deal. A year passed, 12 months of sunshine, painting classes, and quiet, uninterrupted peace. The woman who had fled Cleveland in the dead of night felt like a distant ancestor, a character in a story I could now tell with a sense of detached wonder. My life in Sarasota was no longer new, it was simply mine. The rage that had fueled my escape had long since cooled, leaving in its place not emptiness, but a fertile ground where new things could grow. My only remaining tie to my old life was my quarterly phone call with Evelyn Albright, my attorney. She was no longer just a lawyer to me. She was the architect of my new legacy, the unflappable steward of my final, most important act. She would give me brief, professional updates. My son's lawyer had sent one last, desperate letter, which she had returned unopened. My apartment had been cleared out, with Rose distributing my possessions as we'd planned. My legal erasure from Cleveland was complete, but it was during our call last spring that she gave me the news I had been waiting for. "Florence," she said, and I could hear the rare smile in her voice. "The board has met. We've selected the first recipient of the Robert Hayes Memorial Scholarship." My breath caught in my throat. For a year, the fund had been an abstract concept, a legal structure, a final move in a game of chess. Now it was about to become real. It was about to touch a life. "Her name is Maya," Evelyn continued. "She's a remarkable young woman from the West Side, graduated top of her class. Her father was a machinist at the Ford plant for 30 years before he was laid off last winter. Her mother cleans houses. Maya wants to be a civil engineer, to rebuild the bridges and roads of the city she loves. She was accepted to Ohio State, but there was simply no way her family could afford it. Until now. Tears pricked my eyes. An engineer, a builder, a child of a hard-working man, just like Robert had been. She wasn't just a deserving student. She was poetry. She was the perfect embodiment of everything the fund was meant to be. A week later, a thick envelope arrived from Miss Albright's office. Inside was a single handwritten letter on simple lined paper. It was from Maya. My hands trembled as I read it. "Dear Mrs. Hayes," it began, "I don't even know how to start this letter. Thank you feels like too small a word for what you have done for me and my family. When I received the notification about the Robert Hayes Memorial Scholarship, my mother and I just sat at our kitchen table and cried for an hour. It wasn't just about the money. It was the fact that someone, a stranger, believed in me enough to make an investment like this." My own tears began to fall, splashing onto the paper. She went on, "My dad has been struggling a lot since the layoff. He's a proud man, and it's been hard on him. When I told him the scholarship was in memory of a steelworker, he got very quiet. He said, 'Men like that built this city. They understood that you build a legacy not with what you keep, but with what you give. I never knew your husband, Mr. Robert Hayes, but my dad is right. He must have been a truly good man to inspire a legacy like this. Thank you for keeping his memory, and the dignity of hard work, alive. I promise I will not waste this opportunity. I will make you and your husband proud." I folded the letter and held it to my chest, my whole body shaking with a profound, cleansing sob. This was the return on my investment. Not a luxury car or a designer dress. Not a fancy party or a hollow, broken promise. It was this, the hope of a brilliant young woman, the restored pride of a hard-working father. A legacy of creation, not of consumption. I thought of Julian and Anthony, in their big empty houses, with their broken relationships and their bottomless appetites for more. They had their inheritance, the one they had worked so hard to secure from me over the years, an inheritance of bitterness, resentment, and moral bankruptcy. I had mine. This single, tear-stained letter. And in that moment, I knew with the certainty of a prayer answered who was the truly wealthy one. My revenge was complete, not because I had made them poor, but because I had used the money they coveted to create something beautiful and good in the world. I had finally built a house that no one could ever sell out from under me. I framed Maya's letter. It sits on the small desk in my sunny room, next to a watercolor of a Sarasota sunset that I'm particularly proud of. Some days, I look at it and think about the two men in Cleveland. I no longer feel the fire of anger or the cold ache of betrayal. What I feel now is a quiet, distant pity. I have come to understand that true forgiveness isn't something you give to someone else. It's a gift you give yourself. I forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of the weight of their memory. My revenge was never about destroying them. It was about saving myself. It was about realizing that a life's worth is not measured in the sacrifices you make, but in the value you finally claim for your own soul. A legacy is not what you leave to your children, but what you build inside them. When I looked inside my sons, I found that the foundation I had laid was gone, replaced by selfishness and greed. So, I chose to build elsewhere. My life is quiet now, filled with the warmth of true friendship, the joy of creating, and the profound peace of knowing my husband's legacy is helping build bridges, both literally and figuratively, for a new generation. I am no longer a fortress, a ghost, or a victim. I am simply Florence. A woman who paints slightly clumsy sunsets, a woman who loves the feeling of sand between her toes, a woman who is at last the sole author of her own story, and that is more than enough. The world may never know the battles we fight in the quiet corners of our own families, but here, in this space, we see each other, we know. If these stories speak to the truth of your own journey, if you believe in the fierce, beautiful act of reclaiming your own life, then subscribe and join a community that understands. We are the ones who are rewriting our own endings.